Hello and welcome to the podcast, to the AI Digest. My name is Joaquin, and with me today is Yadhira Arroyo. And it's such a great pleasure to have you, Yadhira. It's uh, it's just a breath of fresh air to have more Latin representation in tech. Uh, Solidarity. Uh, I, I'm just overjoyed to have you share your deep expertise, talk a little bit about your career and some of the things that you enjoy doing in your day to day work.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I will admit, this is an area that is a bit foreign to me, linguistics, and particularly linguistics as an interface from different devices and different mediums,
Mhm.
because I'm I'm sure you will help define this in the minds of the audience. Language is a soup. It's a liquid. It holds the shape of the container of where it lives, and depending on where you are in the world, that container is very different.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point, and that's such a great analogy too, right? Because if you have a little container, you can only do so much, right? But if you have a weird shaped container, maybe you can fill some weird gaps. I love that analogy.
So, Yadhira, where are you're based out of Chicago?
Yeah, I live in Chicago now. I'm a Texan though, but yes, I live in Chicago.
And what is there? What is it that drew you to Chicago, and how have you built your career in that space?
It's irony brought me to Chicago because I left someone to come here, and then I'm still with them now. It's almost like but that aside, though, it's great. We have a baby. It's been
Awesome.
worth it, right? But that's what brought me to Chicago. And in terms of what am I doing here? Well, I mean, it kind of worked out for me in the sense that Chicago wasn't New York or LA. It was like slightly smaller than both, or at least it felt that way, right? And there were equal amount of opportunities, especially like multimodal opportunities, right? Which is basically like omni-channel design, right? Like if you're using linguistics for chatbots, that's what most people know them for, right? But you could also have voice command in cars. You could also have voice command, obviously, in wearables. So, an IVR, so over the phone. So just think of like, I just mentioned four things that leverage voice or language, right? And to be truly multimodal is to be like limitless, to be like whatever mode people will use to communicate. It could be assisted devices, it could be hospital like medical devices as well. So it's really cool to be able to kind of like not be limited to just web or mobile, right? It's really like whatever we want to use this technology for.
I think the what is in fashion now, but I think we're seeing some trends shifting away from that, is the usage of mobile, as you said, and desktop.
Mhm.
But people are wearing more smartwatches, and other people are experimenting with other kinds of wearables. Uh, I don't remember what that thing is called, but it's like a projector in your chest, and you
Oh
can.
my god, are you talking about, not the rabbit, but the other one? Yeah, I forgot. How could I forget?
I don't know, but yeah, I think rabbit. I think that conceptual fuzziness, you're in the right ballpark. It sounds about right, but
Yeah, yeah, I could design for those too. I mean, I used to design for Alexa like Alexa-based, right, technology. So yeah, anything that that leverages voice or even like if you think about computer vision sign language, that's the next I think that's the next frontier because we just touched the surface. I think there's an app called Go Sign, right? And it's an app. And I just love that language actually takes multiple forms, right? But to your point, yeah, we're going to have crazy stuff in the future we don't know about. So how do we design for that? How do we build that mental model in our heads to be flexible enough to scale to that type of like modality?
yeah, that's such an expansive
Mhm.
exercise, right? I mean, you said hand signs. We talked about text. We talked about language, and then tailoring that to be context aware of where you are,
Yeah. Yep.
uh, language aware, right? Because we're
Mhm.
Latino, so maybe we speak Spanish, or maybe we speak English, or a
Or
combination of both.
Spanglish.
Or Spanglish,
Right.
yeah.
I was like, "Órale, güey, what are we gonna do today?" Like how but you're right, like, that's the problem with certain, like, NLP type of things where, you either have to pick English or Spanish. And then the autocorrect is based on that. And let's be honest, autocorrect sucks sometimes, even in whatever language you use, right? But, my biggest problem is when I'm talking to my family in Mexico, I'll
Mm.
use some English words and then it'll autocorrect the wrong way in Spanish, right? So it's like being able to understand context. I mean, you said it, brother. Like it's all contextual and it's all about the nuance. That's what really like NLP, which is natural language processing, and NLU, natural language understanding, is all about. So I would say, if anything, maybe I'm an NLU like designer, right? I design for language, and language can come in many forms.
Um, yeah, that's such an interesting way of looking at it. Your natural language processing is the way that the machines interpret language to perform some sort of task, but natural language understanding is the recipients, the people. How do we
Mhm.
make something that can maybe be crafted by a person, but then understood by many different people according
Yeah.
to their own world? It's such a Man, it's such a rich problem space. I'm curious to hear what are some of the considerations that you have to take into account when you are looking into a new problem,
Yeah.
particularly for natural language understanding. And this is outside of our structured interview, but I'm really, really curious about this.
No, it's fine. I'm like, I'll roll with the punches. No, cognitive courtesy, right? So that's a term that I learned
I
from
love that.
Bjorn, right? Yeah, by the way, a plug for Bjorn because I get all my like high level thinking from him. Like I do a lot of the tactical work, but sometimes I have to come up for air. And he's who I look for, like honestly. And he brought up the concept of cognitive courtesy. I don't know if I tagged you on that post, but he posts a lot on LinkedIn. And when the first time he taught us that was actually inside, like in-house, but then he brought up, like, an article he wrote for LinkedIn and all that. So the more I hear of it, the more it reinforces in me what it actually means, and that's actually what I'm trying to solve for, right? Like, offline, we were talking about how, like, cognitive, like, gaps are a huge issue for me, right? Because you might have disabled people that have cognitive issues or older people that have cognitive issues, right? They all deserve to use, like in my case, banking, right? If I'm creating banking products, I want everybody to use my products, especially like I feel air, water, and banking. Those are an essential, right? Essential need for humans. But if you
Yeah.
don't address the cognitive gaps, you're not going to create products that people can use. So NLU, I really feel is like the ability to use like your empathy to create like to kind of have that cognitive courtesy for other people and then design experiences that the AI can customize, right? Because the awesome thing about AI is it can scale up great ideas. So if you're able to like define the outputs and make the outputs nuanced to the person's like cognitive level or even like not even cognitive level, sometimes it's just age. Like I understand things better now than I did when I was 5, but vice versa, maybe I learned faster when I was 5 versus now, right? So it's almost like addressing those nuances. It's really about teaching, right? It's teaching and learning and then applying those concepts in our design. It's a lot of research, it's a lot of asking people, it's a lot of looking at data and numbers to see, how our initial designs are being taken because we can have a great idea. We think it's a great idea, we interview people, and then in the wild, it could be a different result. So likewise, we have pre-implementation research we do, and then we have post-implementation and analytics that we look at. And then through that process, we tune it, right? So I mean, I hope I answered your question.
I think you gave a pretty good breakdown anatomy of what are the considerations, and I think you gave me a lot more context, and I think this richness that you've woven right now is going to be extremely useful in how we jump into the conversation. I think I should take a step back, and I think I should let you talk a little bit about voice user interface design because that is your profession and that's something that you've been doing even though you've applied it to different mediums,
Mm.
different channels. We talked about omni-channel. um, that is your profession, so can you just say a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so, like, you had another guest on here that made me the biggest fan of yours, right? I told you, Jessica Talisman. She's amazing. When she was speaking, she literally said everything I would want to say, but she said it in a much better organized way, right? So the points I'm gonna tell you now are gonna get inspiration from her talk. I have to give her credit, right? Because she's the one that kinda synthesized it for me. But she talks a lot about taxonomy, she talks a lot about information architecture, she talks a lot about data patterns. I feel that there's, if we're gonna like use the an analogy of left brain, right brain, right? My left brain, the very analytical side of me, looks at numbers, looks at data, looks at taxonomies, looks at the existing way users or clients kind of like surf or navigate through their system. So, for example, if I work on a chatbot, I would look at the chatbot like analytics, right? If I'm working on phones, I would work on phones, right? Like the IVR stuff. So, in my case, we focus on chatbots. So, I look at those data points. And there's different data points all over the place, right? We have like the literal like chatbot metrics that are tracked via like the conversations people have, but we also have voice of consumer, right? So that's like another area where we can kind of like funnel that in. And then there's also other, I would say the customer service people are another data point, right? The qualitative data that we get from call centers. So we aggregate all that information. I specifically look at my projects and try to find as many data sources I can find to kind of either if I'm starting a brand new use case, which we call intents in my world, right? Um, I if it's brand new, I have to do like different type of research, right? I could do exploratory, I could do
You said intense, as in like missions or use cases or things to accomplish?
yeah, intense, like INTENT. Yes. Yeah, everybody calls it differently. That's what we call it over my company, right? But basically they're use cases, right? We need to have use cases now. The way we kinda structure it, and this is where it gets into taxonomy and, like, all the stuff Jessica was talking about, the way we do it is we actually have to think through, like, the machine learning aspect, right? Because what I really do is not only do I do research, but what I actually get paid is to deliver on the tactical, like, I would say natural language understanding architecture, right? I have to see existing intents, and I have to see if certain key phrases are gonna be repetitive, right? Like, for example, I can be talking about a transfer, right? And I could be adding a new intent about, Zelle, right? So, like, Zelle is a type of transfer, but let's say my chatbot can actually make a transfer in chatbot. So, like, I have to, like, very much delineate between the 2 and say, "Okay, what are the keywords that will trigger this intent? What are the keywords that will trigger this intent?" And if there's a possibility where someone may say like, something the same way, and it could be mean both, then that's where you have to kinda create the design aspect of it and create, like, a disambiguation to be like, "Oh, is this what you meant?" Right? So this is beyond, like I say some people, like sometimes there's repair paths where you're like, "I didn't understand what you said. Repeat yourself." This is slightly different. When we disambiguate, it's almost like, "Okay, we know what the problem could be, but we can't read your mind, and we don't want to. We want you to tell us what you're talking about." So it's a specific point where it's like a fork in the road, and we ask them, "Hey, did you wanna do this or this?" Right? Because based on your answer, we don't know. So a lot of my work is literally, like, writing a lot. Like, I write all day. That's what I do all day. I think about it from a user's perspective. Sometimes when we get data, we can get verbatims from users, so we can actually use their actual words as trigger points to train the machines. Once you train the machine enough times, like, the machine will pick up on certain keywords, but a lot of my work is architecture, like information architecture, um, understanding what potential collisions could happen, because the last thing you want is for, like, the computer to go crazy and not know what you're referring to. Like, if I use the exact same keywords and the or very similar wording in one intent and another, the computer's gonna, like, cannot compute, do not understand what's going on, right? So a lot of my work is to prevent that, to be like, "Okay, how can I prevent utterance collisions?" A lot of that has to do with understanding the important words that will trigger an intent, right? Even just having like, not having a word could help, right? Like, sometimes it's cases like that, and I'm trying to think of examples that I could use, but it's like, I can't think of any good ones because I live in the banking world, so to me, all I could think is banking examples. But yeah, no, and, the more narrow the AI is, I feel like the easier it is, right? Because keep in mind, I do narrow AI, I do just finance. I don't do, like, what OpenAI does or, like, what Claude does. So it's a lot easier because we know and we have data already and we can really fine tune and create awesome experiences. It's a lot harder when you expand that. Um, I would say something else I do. So that's, you know, my left brain is very analytical, looks at number, looks at data. My right brain looks at experiences and use cases, right? Like I think as a user and I start thinking, okay, if my use case is search for my transactions, right? Typically, as a traditional UX designer, it would just be one flow. You go to the website, you go to the mobile, you lead them to the transactions page, whatever, look them up, right? if we're thinking NLU, we now have to like overlay nuance. And part of that nuance could be the type of urgency, right? So think about it. I'm looking for transactions because I suspect fraud. That's going to be a different use case than me just browsing, right? So when I design, I actually have to think, all right, what are the stakes, right? Like, are they high stakes? Are they low stakes? Do they need someone now? Because let's say they need someone now and it's fraud related. I'm just going to give them a phone number to call. I'll be like, you know what? You need to get this urgent and we're off hours because I have to be also honest about like timing of day, right? If they message within the time frame where we're open for business and they can talk to a human, I'm going to hand them over to a human. But if there's no live agents ready to take them, then I'm like, you know what? We do have the phones available. They're open, right? So it's almost like that smart routing. And that's actually a patent that we got at the bank. Like we actually, like some of the customer service people and I got a patent for routing them to the right human, right? Like that's a recent thing. But that's all because like you really have to think in use cases. And sometimes you have to like overlay, even if it's the same thing they want to do. I want to make a payment. We ask why, right? Are you doing it because you need to pay now? And you're going to lose your house if you don't pay today right now. Like the high stakes are, it's a different stakes, right? Like I need to pay my house now or I lose it versus like, oh, I just don't want a late payment. Or, oh, I can pay tomorrow. It's not due till next week. Right. So there's different urgency levels. So I would say that's what I do. And then there's also the relationship management, right? Because a lot of my work too is about negotiating the right experiences with people that can approve the experiences, right? So that's what I can't forget. Like it's not just doing this, this, and this. It's like after I'm done with the actual work, I still have to sell it and I still have to present it and I still have to tell that story with data of why it's important to address those issues.
Is that all you do? That's it.
Oh, that's just on Mondays. And then on
Um, yeah, no, I think you painted on some really really cool ways of viewing an enterprise. I mean, sure, it's narrow application in the finance domain, but that doesn't make it any less trivial. It's just it's good that you have that richness of that domain. There are people in any organization that operate within a system to accomplish something. I think you did a fabulous job to say there are customers of a bank where they go and engage to deposit and withdraw, and do other things of related to funds that they manage through an account, and there are people there installed in the organization, tellers or representatives and managers, and they have their own set of priorities. How do I satisfy a customer? How do I give them the money that they need? How do I receive the money that they need? How do I ensure that they are normal actors or
Mhm.
criminal actors? And there's so many different perspectives. But if we just look at it from those three perspectives, you mentioned that keyword intense, and you mentioned that other keyword use cases. They all have their own set of priorities and they overlap in some fashion from different perspectives. Um, but the thing that ties it all together, and you said this when you start in any engagement, is that they have interactions and they produce data,
Yep.
whether that's text, whether that's voice, whether that's other things like that. There's a person that I interviewed for voice analytics. So she was looking at the way that customer service representatives uh, were resolving issues for customers. I mean, you want to get resolution times to be as quickly as possible, and you want to deploy non-human elements so that you can make full use of human elements in more complicated issues. So it's really, I think you laid a good context as to some of the considerations that you have to take into account, and that's just the technical, right? Because no, sorry, that's just the social. You're only looking at the social, the technical aspects of implementing these details
Yeah.
in code and tuning them and testing them and tuning them and testing them and making sure that they're compliant with the expectations of a production environment, and they perform and they have an ROI, and you can sell additional features or prioritize resolution of bugs. That and the other side is a whole political landscape.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's funny that you say that because I think metrics are now more important than ever. And like I feel it at our company. Like we literally kept yeah, I just feel it. But that's not a bad thing. I'm pro data. I mean, I started off in quant. That's the only reason I've been able to pick up AI. It's because like I started in research. I know the concept of garbage in, garbage out. And what I learned about multimodal design is that you need multimodal data inputs,
Mhm.
right? So I'm talking about computer vision, using cameras. I'm talking about like text, voice inputs. There's a lot of different ways you can like consume data. The number one important thing is that it's good data and it's relevant data. And my new philosophy is don't just collect data to collect it. Actually try to collect the minimum amount of data that you need to make decisions to protect the user's privacy, right? Now, sometimes that's a lot of data and that's fine, right? But there's some companies that will just be like, "Oh, it doesn't hurt. Let me just collect that," which is fine until you have a leakage, right? And like, not that that always happens, but sometimes like data also costs money. So if you have all this junk data that doesn't really, it's not contextual or doesn't apply to what like the user really wants and what the business needs,
Mhm.
sometimes it's best not to capture it. But it's really hard to determine what's important to capture, right? Like that in itself is a science. That's why like I love working with data scientists. Like I learned all the time from them.
Yeah, I mean, are you bloating your databases? Are you paying for unnecessary server costs? Is there a sunk cost or psychological tie? Like, why did we spend 20 grand for the last X amount of months to store that crap if we're not using it? I mean, then you have to justify some means of adding it to something you're building because
Yep.
someone doesn't want to admit they made a mistake or the hypothesis proves proven wrong and you
Hmm.
overcommitted resources. All right, we're getting a little. I'm getting jaded. You're giving me flashbacks.
I'm
So
so
let's.
sorry. I didn't mean to like trigger you. I'm so sorry. Apologize.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the fundamental elements again, and kind of keep uh, layering up these different concepts and how they're interrelated. Um, what's a human? What's a human?
Human is, I would say it's a non-machine, but also it's anyone who actually cares about the fellow species of humans, right? Now, and maybe that's too mean, but like what I'm saying is humanity and humans, right? Literally are like biological, they're carbon based, they're on this earth. But I think what makes us different is the ability to empathize and to cognitively reason, right? Like we're able to like contextually, I mean, more important, we can
You would hope.
communicate.
You
You
would
would
hope for
hope.
a
Well,
reason.
that's why I was like, maybe I'm being too mean here. Like you're human only if you have a soul. And you don't have a soul if you're sane. No, but you know what I mean? Like there's some people that, yeah, like, what, I don't want to depress myself. But yeah, for the most part, I believe humans are fellow people that have, the ability to empathize, right? And everybody has different levels of empathy. Like I don't believe anyone's like 100%. I mean, even the sociopaths, I think, can empathize with themselves, right?
Mm.
Like I've seen that. So I'm like, yeah, you just have to like be able to at least care for someone, even if that someone's just you. As long as you care for a human. And a lot of times, a lot of humans care for other humans. That's what makes it beautiful, man. Like, I was just thinking about support systems and how sometimes it's really hard out there with all the layoffs and all the environment, political instability. But what we have all in common is our support system, right? Some of us only have one or two people, some of us have whole communities. But it's really cool, like when you have a down day, to go reach out to a human that you care about and be like, I need a hug, right? And they'll give you a hug or maybe give you a metaphorical hug or give you an ear, right? That's what I call human, someone that's willing to like just experience other humans, right? Like it's a circular argument, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, that's a very expansive view, and it's very telling as to your work, right? I mean, you describe a human to be someone who empathizes and who can reason, and I would think that you have that definition because you aspire to be more human-like every day. Like we all want to be a better version of ourselves, and as a result, in your work, you work to reduce the frictions between interactions against humans because you don't want a bank to antagonize a customer or a customer to antagonize a bank representative.
Oh yeah.
The whole point of designing a system or design at large is how do we reduce the friction points from the intent, from the use case. All right, let's go to another definition. What's a system? What's a computerized system?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the opposite of a human, but it is using carbon-based materials, right, to create chips and circuitry boards, right, that are able to take human inputs regardless of what type of inputs they are, right, and do something with them that humans would take a while to do. Right? So it's like, if we think of AI systems, right? Sometimes I consider the databases part of that, right? The database is the input, the multimodal, like, inputs that go into it. I also consider even the abstract stuff, like the neural networks, right? Because that in itself is abstract, but it's also concrete because you have ones and zeros in some sort of server, right? So even though, like, the neural networks themselves describes what occurs, right? In the end, it's still held by a shell of a server or a computer or something, right? The systems I would also say can be the people, right? Like part of the AI systems can include human oversight. It can include human input. It could also be human consumers, right? Like in the very least, I feel that uh, computerized systems serve at least one of those audiences. In the very least, the output. And if we're lucky and we build systems right, we would have some sort of like human at every stage, right? To make sure, like, okay, I know we can't control guardrails. I know we can't, like, the cat's out of the bag already. We can only put so many guardrails in. But I think the humans are the guardrails for systems because I think that's also the other thing that systems can go wacky
Mm.
and that's part of being the same thing with humans, by the way. Humans can go wacky, systems can go wacky. Like with humans, it's our fellow humans that keep us in check. But what about the systems, right? Sorry for derailing, but I'm like just thinking that out loud. I'm like,
No, I think it's important to make the distinction, even if it's going down to the periodic table. We're
I
all
know.
stemming from carbon, so we're not all so different. Computers and I, we share some sort of family history lineage.
That's
Um,
right. We're both carbon.
but more importantly, I think in this description of what you're saying in the definition, we have some points to we're putting some dots that we're going to connect. So let's talk about that relationship between humans and computers because that is where you work every day. That is the way that you reason, the way that you lubricate those
Mhm,
intents, so that people can just glide through and take the money out of the cash register, right? Or
mhm.
transfer a $40 gift card to my nephew so that he can have something for his birthday. I don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's all about, like, understanding where the human's coming from, right?
Mm,
So that's why I have a lot of respect for, like, the frontline people, like customer service people, because they're like, quote unquote, "the best machines." They can aggregate really quickly which complaints are the worst, right? Like, a lot of times, a lot of my data would be, like, qualitative, where we would talk to the customer service people, and they're like, "Oh, this is an issue, and this is an issue." 3 months later, we would get the report with those same issues. So they're actually able to pick up on patterns a lot quicker because a lot of times, like, you know this, enterprise, like, there's always delays. Like, there's always, like, some sort of, like, batch job. So, like, you have to wait for the report to generate, then, like, that takes a couple of weeks, and then you have to, like, get someone else to chime in, do the data cleanup, and then before you know it, it's, like, 3 months to get a report that someone on the phones could have told you, like, 2 weeks ago orally, like, just like, "Oh, by the way, that we're getting a lot of calls about this," or, "We're getting a lot of, like, messages about this." So that's the good thing about, like, I would say the human network is
mhm.
being able to get the shortcuts from other humans that maybe could also pick up on patterns. Not all humans are like that, by the way, but I feel that the customer service people, like, if you're really good at that, you have the mental model to kinda pick up on patterns because you have to. You wanna make your life easier, especially if customer service, it's really stressful. Like, it's really hard to get yelled at all the time, right? So you develop tricks. Actually, we talked about this kind of psychological tricks, right? That you can kind of like use to control situations, right? To set expectations. So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, that's how I view it.
Yeah, I mean, if you know the ice cream machine is broken, uh, you're gonna try to usher people to buy the apple pies or do something that is a adequate substitute.
Exactly.
So let's dive a little deeper into the discipline of design as a more holistic practice, because I know we're talking from the standpoint of linguistics, and more accurately, human to computer linguistics,
Mhm.
which is the interface that we're using through text or language or whatever. Um, yeah, let's go down a list of a few key terms, and then we can maybe spin up some examples. So accessibility.
Accessibility is super important to me. So, because I feel that I've known a lot of people that have been disabled or have grown old, so they've gone into cognitive decline. Like my grandpa had dementia, and like it's something that's really close to my heart for so many reasons, right? But that's just one example. My grandma went blind in her later years, so imagine not being blind till the very end, right? So like I've kind of seen how like humanity when it gets older, like you just have to adapt, right? And that's actually how I started getting very interested, like, in Alexa and Siri and voice design when my grandma went blind, right? So when I think about accessibility, I think about my grandma, I think about my baby, I think about people that I know and love that, I mean, true story, I knew this I still know this guy who's blind and only speaks Spanish. He could not bank in forever, like, he just there weren't possibilities for him to bank.
Hmm,
Right? There just weren't, because the financial literacy was a hurdle, the
hmm,
language was a hurdle, and I was working at another bank where, you know, basically they said I couldn't speak at a conference for Spanish speaking blind people, right? Keep in mind that, like, I speak Spanish, so I'm able to speak in language, and, the reason I was asked to speak at this conference was because there was a lot of people within that association that just did not have access to financial products because of the language barrier, but additionally, also because they were blind and there weren't accessible products. So, there's a couple of things that happened in my life. That incident where like I basically got told, no, you can't do it because our banking app isn't accessible. So we don't want to highlight that. I'm like, okay, I wasn't going to talk about us. I was just going to talk about general banking, but thank you. Right. I ended up leaving that place. Right. Why did I
uh-huh,
leave it? Because they didn't care about accessibility. They cared about the lawsuits.
hmm,
Right. But by that time, my grandma had already like passed away. And, it kinda got me thinking like, all right, my grandma's the first sign, this other group is another sign, and I just kept getting signs, right? And then my son was born with a cognitive disability, so I'm like, I can't 3 times is the charm, right? Like, I get it now, like, you want me to the universe wants me to focus on accessibility, and what do you know? Like, what I do for a living technically can fill that gap, right? So I would say accessibility and accessibility design is super important, especially for the stuff that humanity needs. So, like, I would say money, unfortunately, for whatever it is, we need it. And you don't mess with people's money, right? So, people should be able to use it no matter what type of disability or accessibility issue they have. So, that's why I feel like if we're talking about human computer interaction, right? It's like some humans just don't have the abilities other humans have, right? Like, if I don't have arms, how am I going to type? I can use my voice, right? If I can't see, how am I going to interact with the visual user interface? I'm gonna have to talk to it. I'm gonna have to hear it, right? So I mean, the more I get into my field, the more I actually get more passionate about it because it can solve problems, like human problems, and give access to people to stuff that they need, right? Like, we're not talking about some fun app where like you don't need to have this. Like, no, no, no. Banking is essential. Like, you need it nowadays. Everybody needs to be independent, and people that don't have access to banking are not independent. And that's a problem for me. So that's why I feel accessibility is important. It's a lifestyle, dude. Like I heard from one accessibility expert and they're like, yeah, it's a lifestyle. I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, it's called empathy, Yachty. It's called thinking of other people. I'm like, fine, it's a lifestyle, right? But no, but they're great. We collaborate with our accessibility guy all the time, right?
hmm.
We literally are on a first name basis with him because he's amazing, right? And he's amazing because he's willing to extend by the way, I'm not surprised he's amazing because he's an accessibility guy. It's in his nature to care, right? And
Mm.
his boss is amazing, and they teach us a lot about accessibility. So it's always about like, what else don't I know and can I learn it?
So I think you covered a little bit on this, but yeah, affordances. I think that's another cognitive way of providing courtesy. But
Yeah.
well, what are they?
Well, that one's slightly different because at first I didn't understand what you meant by that, but I'm like, I can wing it. But yeah, no, but affordances is also like having that range, right? You have like a range of like possible outcomes and allowing for that margin of error, right? Like, don't make a button this small, make it slightly bigger, or, be able to like tune your system in such a way that if someone has a thick accent, afford them some courtesy of like picking up on it, right? So like that's something I learned from like voice design is that someone could say the same word and you have a thick accent and you have someone that doesn't. If you train the system on only clear accents, you're screwed. I can tell the really good systems by like the different like levels they can like the confidence level, right? They adjust the confidence levels, like, okay, fine. And then it works. And it's really cool to kind of like give that. Other affordances, I would say, so not just like with the voice, but I would say also with visual, like the size of things, if someone's older, maybe give them the ability to like customize stuff. I feel with AI, we have more possibility of that. So I feel that like we actually may be able to step up our game, right? If we know how to design with AI in mind and be able to like give people that personalization so that they can actually do what they need to do, you know?
Let's talk about context. I think we've used the word quite a bit in the span of this conversation, but what is it in the context of design?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so AI design, which is what I do, right? You can have a use case, but the context is really what's important, right? Let's say, again, let's use the example I'm searching for transactions, right? I know the user's data. Like I'm saying I as in the machine. The system knows how much money you have in the bank. The system knows what you spend it on. The system knows and can maybe even pick up on patterns of spending that may be kind of weird. So if I know certain data points, I should have your back, right? So that's where like context comes in because if you ask a question about search transactions, if I know certain things about you and something looks shady, guess what? I'm going to filter that through that context and give you a different response and say, you know what, FYI, you've seen, these are interesting transactions. Are these yours? Right? The system, may hijack the conversation and confirm certain things if I see something weird is happening in your account. If that context is missing where, you know what, it's a regular old Monday, doesn't look like anything weird's happening, I'm just going to give you your search results, right? I'm just going to give you like whatever you were searching for. There you go. Right. But context makes the difference because we have more information now than any other period in life, right? Like we were able to capture data, have databases, and we now have the ability to really control the experience. And a lot of it is about like, how can we use this, whatever we know about you so that we can make the context and so we can understand the context and so that we can address what like the root thing you want to do, right? Because sometimes you may ask for something, especially if you're using language like linguistics, like text or something.
Mhm.
You may say things a certain way, but you may actually want something else, right? So that's also context. Like, let's get more contextual, like data points to understand how to answer this. Sometimes you almost need to ask more questions, like a real human, right? Ask more questions to get the context so that you can give the right answer. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think intent is very clear, but the mode of fulfilling that intent is sometimes fuzzy because we don't always have the precise chaining of words in
Hmm.
the right context to get the outcome that we want. So I appreciate that perspective of having a system sort of provide a level of empathy, of courtesy, cognitive courtesy, where you can help narrow down. Do you want the vanilla or the chocolate? I mean,
Yeah. Or
I
even, you know what, based on time of day, right? If you're asking very late at night and we know a payment is due, right? I mean, I'm
yeah.
telling you, this is the type of conversations I have, right? Like time of
Mhm.
day, because that impacts context. Uh, Season, depending on the season, if it's tax season and someone's looking for their documents, we can assume tax documents,
Mm,
right? So there's certain
yeah.
things that we take liberties on, but it also comes from like just understanding the different variables, right? So context will change from industry to industry, but for banking, it could be like time of day, it could be like if there's any like suspicious activity, if it's also like seasonality in terms of tax season or otherwise, or if we've noticed that you've submitted, like example, large purchases, if you've submitted for like a pre-approval for a house, right? That's also context. So yes, there's a lot of different ways to kind of decipher that and kind of get context out of the user.
Digital literacy, I guess, and by extension, sort of technical literacy.
Cognitive courtesy, right? We're gonna have some people, and I'm not gonna say older people because I've met some really awesome older people that can school me
Mhm.
in terms of digital literacy. But again, some of those people have always been digital experts, right? So those are, I wanna say they're
Fair.
not old, they're just digital experts that are older. But
Yeah.
let's say that there's, people that just, blue collar workers. I've met a lot of them, like my contractor, right? He's like, "I don't use computers, I don't use phones," right? He works with his hands all day, he doesn't need to. He has somebody else to help him with that, right? So, that's also, like, important, understanding someone's level of digital literacy and meeting them where they're at, because we should never shake our finger at them and be like, "How dare you not do it?" It should be like, "Alright, how can I meet you?" And that's also where, like, multimodal design is important, 'cause guess what? They might use the phone. Right? So that's another mode, like, adjust to the user and how they communicate, um, and figure out how to meet them where they're at, right? So, yeah, the concept of cognitive courtesy is huge. And I guess now contextual courtesy, right? Like, if there's anything else we have to keep in mind, you know?
Mm. Education.
Yep. Well, if we talk about education, specifically my field, it's a huge issue. Right? And I feel AI can actually help solve, like, financial literacy issues, just because it took me having to get into finance for me to understand it,
Mm,
right? Like, I went to school, I got a degree, I almost got a major in finance, and I still didn't get it,
mm,
right? It's really complex, and things change, and rules change, um, so sometimes what people do because they're afraid of, like, that, you know how, like, when you turn on the faucet, it's just all at once? It's almost like, how do you have the cognitive courtesy to give people the information they need as they need it,
yeah.
so that they're not overwhelmed, right? So I would say with education is all like, when do they need it? How do they need it? And how can we make it, like, not seem as heavy?
What is the minimal effective dose to help them achieve the things they need?
That's why chatbots are important because they get to dictate that, right? They can ask the chatbot questions and the chatbot can give them precise answers or similar answers to what they need to hear, but then give them options, right? Like a lot of times when we design like educational type of things, it's almost like, all right, here's a teaser. This is what you asked for, but did you mean this too? Or did you mean that? And then you give them that like rabbit hole they can follow, right? Because once you know what they want to know, you can like actually use AI to predictively tell where they want to go next. So that's the beautiful thing about AI and patterns. You can actually use that data to see what other people like them research and create a curriculum around that.
Feedback loops.
Ooh, important. I don't think we have enough. I think an example would be OpenAI's thumbs down, thumbs up, right? That's good. I don't think they had it the whole time, but they added it eventually, right? They added it eventually. I would say what would make their life easier is if you allowed human scoring of answers. Because right now, a lot of times, I'm sorry?
No, I actually saw, unless I'm hallucinating, that they had a magnitude. So they had one thumbs up or double thumbs up if it met expectations or if it exceeded them. So I think what you're saying, I think they already feature flag deployed or whatever.
Yeah, you know, but I think you should also allow inputs, like not just thumbs up or thumbs down, but actually someone to type in or like say text about what they liked about it. Because there's so much criteria. Like from a data scoring standpoint, right? Like they have people like data annotators that are kind of like going behind the scenes, rating the content across the different chatbots like Bard and Claude and Chat GPT, and then kind of scoring them on certain dimensions, right? Well, what if like they actually open that up to like regular users and not professionals? Right? You might not get the sophistication, but a regular user will tell you when something sucked and why. And then use that to kind of understand how to score it. I mean, because right now you're paying someone to professionally go in and score it, which is great. But part of me is like, I've always like feedback feedback loops where the
Yeah,
intended user is the one giving us the points, right? Because
at
they're
the
the
right
ones using it.
time.
There you go. You get it. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like at the point of contact within the context because they're the ones looking for that information. So they know why they're looking for it and how it went wrong, or even better, how it went right.
The waiter's not gonna ask you if you like your dessert via mail 2 weeks later after you're out of the restaurant. They're gonna ask you, like, "Did you like the banana pudding?" "No, it was garbage." "Okay, we're gonna fix that." Let's give you a drink to remediate that. Um,
Well, there you go. Okay, so talk about like learning from everybody, right? That example is a great example of how we should do things. Well, let's remediate it. How does that look like? Right? And it
mhm.
might be different for every company, but I love that idea.
Better to lose a drink than lose a customer.
Exactly.
Um, Heuristics.
Oh, those are important. We always do those. When it's an existing intent, not it's not an issue. We could just do our own heuristics review. But if it's a brand new intent, what we do is research like competitors and do heuristics on their products, right? And then we want to see like what went wrong, what went right. And even after we launch it, we'll still do heuristics because we want to keep up to date and make sure nothing has changed or the context still makes sense. But those are super important, just even as a first pass to be like, all right, what does my gut as a human tell me? We'll get into the scientific portion and research this, but for now, what are the major issues that I don't even have to be a professional about and that I can tell? Right. And sometimes what I'll do, I'll even ask people to tell me what they think. Like I'm not talking about research participants, I'm talking about my friends. I'll be like, hey, what do you think of this? And then once I get their intel, I'll play researcher, right? And then I'll look for those issues as well. So yeah, no, I think they're super important to like at least get some benchmarks on what's already out there, if it is. And if it isn't, then at least um let's say if it is, right, already out there, you get benchmarks. If it isn't, at least you get inspiration, right? If it's from a competing industry or similar industry, but not the same competitors.
IVR.
So that's phones. I don't know what I think it's interactive voice something. I forgot what it stands for.
Let me look it up. But it's branching. I think it's kind of what you were saying. There's an intent. An intent wants to achieve something, but sometimes you need to create these branch paths where people can take and choose their own adventure.
Oh,
As
IVRs are complex, man, because that's limited technology. Now they have interactive SMS, I think. Have you heard of that? Where like they'll send you something to your text to approve a T's and C's if you're
it
on the
makes
phone.
sense. It makes
It's
sense.
awesome. Oh my God,
Internet.
Amex does that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of companies that do that. I think Comcast does it too, where you'll be on the phone and instead of them reading it to you, they'll be
Mm,
like, I sent you a link, just approve.
mm. Interactive voice response. No, that is interesting. I mean, it sort of resolves security issues, or if you want to have a redundant element, or if you're going to address problems in new generations, like people don't like to talk on the phone. Maybe they like to have just email or app interactions,
Mhm.
and then you want a second redundancy to make sure that they're the right person. Text it to their
Oh,
phone number.
two-factor authentication too. You're right. Absolutely. Yep, yep. And I think I said it wrong. I think it's visual IVR that I'm talking about when they send a text message, but they could do everything. I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
email as well. That
Mhm.
is such a good point. Yeah, no, IVR is hard to design for. I'll tell you that because that's like
It's
100%
weird.
voice.
It's weird. It's a. I guess it would be demographic specific. Like, what kind of devices do they use? What kind of communication channels do they prefer? Right. I mean, I think there's just such a extensive data collection, configuration, preference management solution that you need to have in place, and then you need to maintain that.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's it's
who's to say you don't send it to the wrong number or an old email or an old address or
well, there you go. There's a lot. But I think if you have I almost feel like it's a lot, but we need to have it because there are people that are going to need the phones. And then, like, if all by the way, when all other systems are down, usually phones aren't not because 'cause they're, like, a different system, right? So that's the good thing about having IVR, that in the worst case scenario, you can maybe still call a center, like, if you can't if the website's down.
um I think we already went over this, but let's go through it again. Multilingual considerations.
Oh my god, translation. So, I got this really cool article from one of, like I'm gonna call it the Slack community because you have your community of swarms, right? And then there's my community, and we have this Slack community where we just share really cool stuff. And there's this lady Dorcas who like sent us like an article about Mali, like used to have French as their national language, but then they like now go for like I guess like there's 12, I think 12 or 13 native language that they now switched over to. So instead of having one national language, they have like 12 regional ones.
Mm.
So they're actually leveraging AI technology to be able to create educational resources for the various language, right? Because before it wasn't an issue. If you had just standardized French as a national language, you have all the education in French, right? You don't need to translate. Everybody knows French. But what happens when it's fragmented and now you have like different languages, right? That's what ChatGPT or some of the other stuff that they use, like as the back end to fuel that education, like, module, right? To be able to say, okay, this is the French version, but then here's the X, Y, and Z versions. And now it's not as hard to do because before, imagine having to do like 12 different iterations of something, right? But now you don't have to. You can leverage AI. So I
Yeah,
would say
you
that's one example. I mean, another example is like App Branch. If you don't, I don't know if you've ever actually, let me ask you, when you call, have you ever pretended to only speak Spanish anywhere?
no, no.
Okay, I have. I'm a jerk like that. I'm like, I want to see their Spanish capabilities. So what I've used to do is like I used to call certain centers, and if I needed to do something customer serving, right, like servicey, Citibank. I used to have a Citibank account. I would call them in, and then I would ask for Spanish. They would have to call a third party translator line to get in there. Now, I also happened to work with Citibank at the time, so I
Mm.
know they would charge at least X amount of dollars per minute to do it. So it was not cheap. So imagine me just calling about account questions, but then spending half an hour with them, right? Like that's just not cost effective, right? But imagine if there was actually, real-time AI systems that can transcribe and translate what I'm talking about without
Yeah.
having to call a third party, right? That's legit stuff that can be done today, right?
Mm.
That wasn't possible when I first started in banking. So that's another application for that.
Mm. Yeah, I've seen and I personally use ChatGPT for some minor English to Spanish
Oh, do
translation
you?
because it retains much better grammar than my broken Spanish can possibly muster up. So I do see the value in it, and I know that there are companies that they're multinational in organizations that they have 8 languages or whatever
Yeah.
amount of territories that they cover, and they need to tailor, you know, imagine they had to translate a thousand pages, and they were all constructed in English. That is so expensive, time
Mhm.
consuming, requires so many specialists that only have a certain amount of throughput uh, for a given amount of time, and they still need to be sort of quality checked. It's much cheaper, um, and sometimes even more accurate to do like a multimodal AI solution, transcribing things from one thing to another thing
Mhm.
at scale. But yeah, let's keep going. Priming.
Priming. Ah, yeah, that refers to, like, prompting, right? So, like, basically and it's weird because in my world, we kinda use that, but not so much. So priming, I don't know how to describe it. I'm really bad at this, but it's really about setting up the system and understanding what the system's limitations are. So, for example, some of the chatbots I've worked on, we had really good memory. Again, we're narrow AI, right? Keep that in mind. So, when you have a smaller system with a smaller data set with a very specific purpose, it's a lot easier to do certain things. So, memory was never an issue for some of the projects I worked on. So, you didn't really have to worry about certain priming elements. I would say that that's why a prompt training is important and being able to like piecemeal, especially the bigger the system, the more you have to be cognizant of like, okay, how do I interact with the machine? Right now, prompt engineers are super important because there is still that layer of translation that needs to happen, and Prime is one of them. You have to be able to like be able to set yourself up to for success by being able to give the system like enough information but not too much that it can get overwhelmed, but also keeping in mind the memory issues. So I would say like I don't know if I defined it exactly how I wanted to, but priming is part of the prompting process to be able to get the output you want. How you do it, how you prime, is really depends on your style. There's some really cool courses out there. Like there's actually one called Prime Prompt and something else by Jordan Wilson that kind of teaches you how to prime for what you want. Because depending on what you want, you may want to prime things differently, right? You may want to like use certain keywords or use a certain structure even, right? Because nowadays you can even use code, right? Like Claude, I think allows you to use like Python-esque type of like commands to be able to like prime an answer out of the system. So yeah, I hope I answered it. I'll be honest, I'm not as well versed in the Gen AI terms as I am in like my narrow AI world.
No, I think you answered it and delightfully gave me even further insight into the unique experiences that you've come across. Yeah, no, I think psychological factors would be next.
Mm,
But maybe we can group them the last three together as a tie-in because I do know we want to spend even 5 minutes of time or 10 minutes of time to discuss how all these things are translatable and transferable from one discipline to another.
mhm.
Um, Psychological factors, safety parameters, and symbolism.
The symbolism might be hard. So I'll start with the other one. Psychological factors, you have to know your audience, right? Thankfully, like I'm not working on a mental health app, but that would be a prime example of like psychological factors, right? Depending on who your audience is, you may not want to mention certain things, right? So my friend, she worked at the Rain Network. So she volunteers there as one of the humans that answers the phones and answers the chat. And the first thing they put her through is like several months worth of training on just the psychological factors of doing her job. Right. So imagine if a human has to get that training to understand what not to say, how to treat certain things. Legally, they can't say certain things. The same thing goes into a machine. The difference is humans, at least at a certain level, don't have to have as much training because we've already been human for a while. We've always been human versus a machine who really is a child, right? You're training this from the very beginning sometimes. And like you have to kind of like train the machine to pick up on certain things and then also know when not to say certain things or to like reframe certain things in a certain way, right? So I would say like there's several factors, right? If you're working on a product where psychological safety is imperative, it's even more important, right? Versus banking where it's like, okay, I'm probably not going to trigger you if you look at your account, right? It's different. I mean, if you get triggered because you have a low balance, that's on you, right? But
That's
that's not
a
on
whole
me, right?
different set of concerns that are outside of the system. Yeah.
Right? But then okay, so the other one you said, which is psychological, which is the other one?
Safety parameters, psychological factors, and symbolism.
Safety parameters. That's super huge for me, right? And I would say healthcare, finance, anywhere where you're like dealing with someone's personal something, whether it's personal health data or personal like banking. Yeah, you need safety, right? Like, and that's not just like safety in terms of keeping them safe, which by the way, in banking you should, right? Like imagine you being able to use computer vision to detect when someone's getting robbed and being able to transfer that information over to the police, right? As far as I know, maybe some banks do it. I don't know, right? But my point is that's an example of safety, right? Which isn't just cause no harm, but I would almost say proactively protect people, right? So there's that two angles of like, let's not harm people, but also let's protect people, right? And then if we start getting into the metaphorical aspect of it, it's data, protecting people's privacy, protecting people's business. If it's not out there because of them, don't put it out there. Protect against leaks, right? Also, if we're going to get philosophical and if we leave my world and go into Gen AI, right? I would say also about the safety of the data that you like respond with, right? Because if you give inaccurate data, if you have hallucinations, you don't know what people are going to do with that data, and that could actually lead to harm, right? And let's say just something really hypothetical. Uh, a medical student in residence is asking ChatGPT for an answer for something, and ChatGPT gives them the wrong answer, right? That could cause harm. You would think that someone like that wouldn't do that, but you'd be surprised, right? You'd be surprised. So that's one aspect of safety. The other safety is safety of one's originality, right? We don't think about this. I'm going to tie it in with ethics, but like, I don't want my artwork to be stolen. I don't want you to train your machines on how I do stuff. That's why I purposely don't put my art out there. I don't put my music out there. I don't put my drawings out there because when I'm ready, I'll create my own GPT in my style. But for now, I can't guarantee people will keep that safe, right? So that's another thing to consider. Symbolist, symbolic systems, right? Let's talk about that. People in general will learn faster if what they feel they're learning is something they already know. So analogies are huge, right? So when, specifically for my stuff, I don't think we use as much symbolism. Like, and I'm talking about my stuff as in work stuff. But I'm going to say fun stuff, I use a lot of symbolism, right? A lot of symbolism. In fact, my whole job ever, like I've always gotten promoted because I'm able to tie it in with the metaphor. So symbolism is huge, especially when you're developing infographics or training modules. If you can ladder it up to something that people already understand and it's very similar, then just switch the words and use that as the symbol, the symbol for how to communicate that. How it applies to AI, I think it could apply to outputs, especially like AGI, like Gen AI stuff. Like if we think, symbol, right? Like how can we, and like actually let's use symbolism to describe symbolism, right? Outputs, right? If ChatGPT could contextually understand why I'm going to use some data, give me the ability to copy and paste in that specific file format. So for example, when I try to copy and paste ChatGPT into an Excel sheet, it doesn't work. But what if part of that is saying, as part of its interface, use a symbol, right? For hey, you're different. There's different ways to copy and paste. You can copy and paste as a CVS. You can copy and paste as a PDF. You can copy and paste as whatever. I mean, I will tell you, there's tools that use that now. Like I think Mira Board uses it, and I think these are all plugins that leverage this, right? And there's also Figma. So if you use Figma as a designer, you can copy as an image, you can copy as something else, and it's still symbolism, and it's not technically AI, but that could be applied to AI. I feel we just haven't seen that yet. Like we haven't really experienced multimodal outputs yet, at least
Mm.
not from like Gen AI. We have, by the way, on the SaaS end, on the B2B end, like those systems are cool and they've been around for a while. But in terms of like consumer facing stuff, we haven't
Yeah.
really seen multimodal yet.
Thank you very much for giving us an overview as to some of these core definitions and considerations for what makes up the discipline of voice user interface. But more importantly, if we zoom out, these are all considerations that any kind of designer, irrespective of the medium or the sense that you are affecting or the cognitive function that you're affecting, there is some sort of thinking process to shape these things to create some sort of desired effect or outcome or realize an intent.
Mm-hmm.
There are musicians that want to construct feelings or express a certain message. There are visual artists that want to empower or
Mm-hmm.
suppress or distort or enhance certain ideas. There's artists such as furniture makers. I don't even know. Like there's just so many things that are tactile in nature. You said kiosk,
Yeah.
maybe automated. What do you call those things where you drive by in the highway and you pay your fare?
Oh yeah. Those tolls or whatever. Those
Toll booths.
yeah. How
Uh,
cool is that?
a lot of things can be tactile, engage with people in a physical realm, but those are all considerations that you would try to figure out
Mm-hmm.
how does that all tie into a Spanish speaking blind person that needs to passage through this area. I mean, he wouldn't be driving a vehicle, but
Oh God. Well, you never know. You never know now, right?
well, even if he was blind, you wouldn't want to discriminate against him
Yeah.
moving through the highway. But yeah, what do you want to say about the discipline of design and how it's interdisciplinary and you can transport what you learn in finance to
Yeah.
healthcare or healthcare to finance to hospitality to whatever.
Well, let's tie this up to like something I learned from you, right? Like the business lover stuff we were talking about, right? That if you like, well, first of all, let's cover that, right? If you can prove something can save money or can increase revenue or can satisfy more customers, right? Those are the three levers we're talking about. If you can tie that in to what you do, and I would say as a designer, our key value is, well, two things: empathy and creativity. right? I
Mm.
feel like some of the best designers I've worked with, they care about fellow humans. They care about the customer, right? But they also like so they care about the customer, but they're also like creative. They're also thinking of solutions that I would have never thought of. I mean, I got into this world as an analytical person. Like I was a mathematical person. I even wanted to get a degree in finance and econometrics. So that's my brain. My brain's actually very mathy. And I play the drums. That's mathy. That's a mathy instrument, right? So I had to kind of learn how to be creative. And some of the coolest colleagues I have are like art school people, are actually art school dropouts, like they didn't even finish. But that's the cool thing, that it's really intelligent people are creative and vice versa, right? So in terms of transferable skills, I would say that can translate. Empathy and creativity can translate. There are several hard skills and technical skills you have to learn, all of which rely on language. If you can learn how to write more, if you can learn to like look at language and codify it, dissect it, right? You're going to do really well in AI design. Right now, my concern is there's a lot of quote unquote AI design leaders who got a budget, but they've never done design in like AI design in their life, right?
Mm.
That's fine. You can get a budget, you can do whatever. Please get someone that knows what they're doing. Right. So it's a lot easier and less like a lot less like high stakes issues. If someone that was an individual contributor messes up, right? Lot less of an impact if a leader messes up. So I'm very pro educating people and on the IC level. If you're an individual contributor and you want to get into AI, I feel a lot more comfortable about someone like that getting in there and making a positive change than I am about a potential leader who never has experience and doesn't know what to hire for. The reason I bring this up is that those people, you can tell they have never done AI because they're hiring visual designers. If
Mm.
you're an AI leader that's a designer, right? And you know how to design for products, you're going to pick linguists. You're going to pick taxonomists. You're going to pick people like Jessica Talisman who can set you up for success because that's the background for a lot of conversational design and NLU design. Yes, we do need visual designers. So the good thing is anyone in any place in their designer career can go into AI. But a surefire way is if you understand the basics, right? If you understand like why data is important, even if you don't get into data science, appreciate data. If you can learn how to write and appreciate language and codify it and make sure like to understand the structure, grammar is super important. That's going to help you. If you're a researcher, right? If you're an abstract thinker, that's going to help you. Now, in order to get that job, you are going to have to tie it to one of those three levers, right? You're going to have a portfolio that says, this is how my design helps solve this problem. Because they're not going to hire you for creativity. That's what's going to make you good. I'll be
Yeah.
honest, like the best ones will, but what they're going to hire you is how you tell that
Functional.
story.
Yeah. There. Dang, you said something that really stuck out with me. Creativity. I mean, we talked about digital literacy, but I think something that is fundamentally flawed is creative literacy. When you say I'm not creative or whatever, you're coming from this world of mathematics. I'm sure at one point or another there's this stereotype. I can't doodle, you know.
Mhm, mhm,
I can't do this simplistic technical outline. That's okay. Can you
mhm.
reason? Can you talk?
Yep.
Can you think? Can you ask questions? Can you synthesize information? Can you do pattern recognition? A lot of us can, you know, and you don't have to be someone that is a painter or a musician or a chef. Those things help, even if you like perfumes and you can differentiate the differences
Mhm.
between modes of smell, you are understanding how different factors create different feelings and different people like those feelings and how you can create uh, or lubricate them achieving a particular goal. I
Yep.
want to be taken seriously. I want to have a home that is grounded. Let me paint it brown and have earthy tones. I want to have it be vibrant and magical. All right,
Mhm.
put a little bit of warm tones in there and put reflective surfaces and have it have a disco ball and put light laser light beams and turn it on at 6 in the morning and play disco music for our wake up alarm. I mean, we are designers of this world. We are all creators, and it's not just doodling. It's thinking and imagining and bringing
Yeah.
it back to the real world. How do we save money, make money, or help more people?
Yep. Yep. You said a lot of really cool stuff. Creativity, it's funny, it's not just artists, right? Like, absolutely. I feel like my dad would always say the same thing, like, oh, I'm not creative, I'm an engineer. Yes, you are an engineer, but the solutions you came up with are creative, right? Like these were problems that people have been trying to solve for decades before you came along and because you're able to think differently, right? So again, you know what? Let me backtrack a little and say I've met a lot of different people that are creative. A lot of them went to art school, but a lot of them are also PhDs. Right? Like they went and got their math degrees. So to your point, actually some of the best people are developers. Now that I think about it, like they're makers. They're just people that are like going to get out there and create, whether it's music or a program or even like a data structure. Right? Like I'm going to keep saying like Jessica Talisman, I'm like her number one fan cuz you could tell she's creative just the way her mind connects the dots and she's able to explain herself. Creativity doesn't mean like floofy airy artist. It means someone who can think in different ways to your point. Exactly, looking at the different dots and connecting them, right? And finding that creative link.
Yeah. Yadira, we're gonna have to do a part two of this or do some sort of live webinar.
Oh my god,
Um,
yes.
I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Is there any last are there any pieces of advice that you'd like to offer somebody who's just taking the journey and trying to find their identity? I think you can offer a unique perspective in it that you were mesmerized by numbers and quant, and then you find that the world is a bit more holistic than just numbers or ones and zeros. H- what can you give to somebody who's just starting out? Say they're your child, and they need to understand how to take a path or how to take a step in the journey that's going to give them their identity or help them find their own identity.
Um, so I was gonna steal your idea, but you stole it back. No, but I'm gonna say talk to people and be curious. Listen to people, talk to people, because you'll never know what you wanna do, right? Until you talk to the right person, you're like, "Oh, that's cool. I think I wanna do that," right? AI may not be for you, or maybe it will be, but just I'm talking about everybody. Talk to that grocer, talk to the mail person, talk to that random, right? That's why I told you I'm gonna steal your idea because I would have never given this advice had we not talked beforehand, right? Because I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Like, because that's by the way, some of the coolest people I've met were at some line at the bakery, right? Where I'm like just chit chatting, talking about getting potsies and we're gonna get donuts and cakes. And then before you know it, I'm like talking to some random older lady. Like literally, I'm like, hey Carla, what's up? It happens. You'll meet people that you end up gravitating towards that like otherwise you would have never met just because you like decided to be friendly. So I would say be curious, be kind, talk to people and ask them questions. Ask them this question, right? What advice would you give to your kid, right? And you'll find out that you'll learn a lot.
Lovely. Anyways, it's been a pleasure having you, and yeah, we're gonna have to do this again sometime.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I you know how I feel. I'm very honored. Thank you.